Hey everyone, how you doing? So it's Clara. I'm filming this in December, as you can probably guess, but I realise that this isn't going to come out till January. So if you're confused by the Christmas tree, there you go. For those listening on podcast, I have a Christmas tree behind me. So New Year, and I've got a fresh batch of science chats with some colleagues and friends of mine who are just amazing scientists, but also great scientific role models as well. And today I'm excited to start this new batch with a discussion with Dr Michael Sulu, who is a bioengineer at UCL in London in the UK. Awesome person. I always have such a great chat. Pretty much everyone that's here on this, I love chatting to them. I can chat to them for hours, and it was no different today. But I managed to keep an eye on the time so that it wasn't too long. So, you know what? Why don't we just get into it, eh? Let's do that. Hi, Michael. So, Dr. Michael Sulu, can you introduce yourself for the audience? Tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, sort of the elevator pitch of your work.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So my name is Dr. Michael Sulu, or Mike. I am a biochemical engineer, and I work at University College London. My work, I guess, over the years has changed a lot, actually. So my department is very, very, very kind of healthcare focused. So all of the things that we do revolve around some of the cell and gene therapy work. But when I was a student, an undergraduate, it was all focused on making antibodies as a therapeutic for things like cancer.
Sorry.
I didn't really want to work with healthcare, so I moved over for my PhD and did some renewable fuel work. So I did biological hydrogen production, which was, I really enjoyed it. It was enjoyed it as much as you can enjoy a PhD. So
Yeah.
But it was using E. coli, the bacteria, to make hydrogen from sugar-containing waste that we got from Cadbury's. It was like energy from waste. I was really interested in it. And then for my first postdoc, I stayed in kind of bioenergy and looked at making doing anaerobic digestion using different waste sources, including a few kind of algae types, so macro, from seaweed, and then also from like your normal microalgae as well. Left that and moved back to UCL, and because of that was kind of forced back towards healthcare. And I had for I think 6 years, I ran a facility that was all about the first step in a bioprocess, so teaching students and doing some research in different methods of growing different types of microorganism. And I tried to grow everything. So bacteria, yeasts, fungi, algae, mammalian cells, or basically anything that would be grown. I would grow, but usually with a healthcare focus. But this year, and I guess over the last 18 months or so, it's become very increasingly clear that our students don't all go out into healthcare industry. And because of that, we've had to think about what we should teach our students. And the newest thing that people are doing research in, and which is what I'm going to move into over the next, hopefully 18 months, 2 years, is alternative protein sources for food. So from anything from what they call cellular agriculture, so growing meat cells to create meat products, through to any kind of grown protein source, whether that be, I guess it will always be a yeast or fungus based, or have a plant derivation.
Wow, that's so cool. Like, there's so many different aspects in there I can talk about, or ask about at least. So how did you get started then? Did you do a sort of life science undergrad? Was it, I'll be honest, I don't really know the bio side of it all that well, so I'm much more comfortable with the physics engineering side. But so how did you start off?
So I think I am too, actually.
Fair.
I did. I actually started off in the department I work in now. So I did a biochemical engineering degree, which is I guess it was like a sibling of chemical engineering. So it's process
Okay.
engineering. But we had to, as well as learning about how to put processes together, learn about how specific types of microorganisms work. And they're the ones that you usually use in industrial processes. So a lot of them are done with the bacteria E. coli. And then there's a couple of yeast-based processes that use, like, I guess, a version of baker's yeast or brewer's yeast, so Saccharomyces, and another one which is called Pichia, which is used because it's easy to control how it grows a little bit, and also how it produces things. So my undergrad was, I guess, basically like a chemical engineering degree,
Okay.
but removing the oil and gas and replacing it with bacteria.
Ah, wow. I hadn't even put that together. So, the stuff you're talking about reminds me. I had an ex who was did a PhD in a similar sort of stuff, but
Yeah,
her first degree was biology based. So that's why I was asking. So I didn't even think about it being a sort of biochemistry. That's so cool. I love
yeah.
it.
It's not
Yeah.
widely done. Most places you would do chemical engineering and then have an interest in biology or biochemistry. So there's only I think there's only maybe two or three standalone. There's only one standalone department, only two or three places that have the degree as a whole in the country.
Wow. Huh. Yeah. I had no idea. And it's actually kind of nice because I, not that I have any idea about growing stuff, but some of the things that you were mentioning, some like the yeast and some of the proteins and stuff like that, it's like, oh, I have a vague memory of that from a long time ago, but not loads. Not loads, but some. Really not my field, but it's kind of cool. And so, yeah, so you were working on trying to create fuel, energy,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah.
Wow, is that viable?
Uh,
Sorry.
Why would you shoot my dreams down like that?
And I didn't mean it. What I meant was, is it exciting and something that we're looking forward to?
um, I think, as with many biological processes, it actually depends how you frame it. Um, so for my PhD, because it was a waste source that would normally be discarded or potentially burnt if you could dehydrate it, it technically is viable because you're doing better than you would have done with it anyway. But if you were to if you were to try and make hydrogen just by producing sugar, that would be not economic.
Yeah.
But yeah, because you've got a waste that you're gonna have to either pay to dispose of or dispose of in some way. It's a good method for disposing of your waste more than a good method for producing energy.
Okay. Yeah, no, it might have, I didn't mean to sound flippant, but it's just, so I dabble a little bit with fusion energy.
Mm-hmm.
And, fusion energy, they're just starting to build ITER, which is hopefully the one fusion generator that's going to actually produce rather than just consume, or rather give out more than it puts in. And we're still not going to really know till 2040, and it's going to cost billions in the meantime. So, I mean, obviously, it's a good. So, any idea of potential ideas for energy production are fascinating, but I see the technological, what we need to overcome with fusion energy in particular. I see that it seems to be an uphill struggle. I think it's possible, and I think it could work, and I think it's a good future. But
Yeah.
when I hear about other means, and like you say, if all this sugar is going to go to waste, if all this stuff's just going to go to waste, and we can produce energy from it, that's kind of cool because that waste has still got to go somewhere as well.
Yeah. So it was definitely an energy producer versus so net energy producer.
Yeah, yeah,
When I finished my PhD, it was a net energy produure. At
that's
the
cool.
beginning of it, it wasn't.
Yeah,
But I mean, you're always going to have to do that energy balance, aren't you? Like if you're, and yeah, you're massively economically, you're helped massively by the fact you're using a waste. And
yeah,
waste, like in my field, if you're not making food or drink or making something to do with healthcare, it's all about waste valorization. Just trying to do the best you can with the waste that you have.
No, that's cool. And like I say, I just find it fascinating when you're hearing about different fields and different, like I say, especially getting rid of waste because we don't want the waste, we want to get rid of it, and then if we can produce energy, that's, you know, nothing but a bonus. It's
Yeah.
certainly better than burning fuel or burning coal or gas or something like that. So I think that's really cool, and yeah, I was just curious. So, I mean, is this being done? Is it something that, because you said it's a few years ago now? If you've been since you moved away, are they actually sort of using this for producing energy now?
No, no. I guess it was a hypothetical project rather than like being truly industrially relevant. I think people are really focusing on, like, it comes in waves as with all research, isn't it?
Yeah.
The use of hydrogen as an energy carrier is kind of peaking again a little bit. The method for production is still, I guess, under development. A lot of people are looking more towards um, solar powered electrolysis,
Okay.
um, or I, I guess getting the heat uh, to drive a thermochemical reaction and getting the heat from like nuclear reactors,
Hmm.
waste heat. Wherever you can get it from, I guess, would also be another method. The biological method isn't perfect. Um, it could probably be further improved from what I did,
Yeah.
but like not an order of magnitude better.
Yeah. No, that's fair enough. And like I say, I mean, with fusion, we're so far off at the moment. I mean, there's a lot more work to go. And I mean, you said that a lot of the research in that, a lot of the research in that field is about sort of waste and dealing with waste and stuff like that. I mean, is that a big problem that we've got lots and lots of food sugary waste that we need to get rid of? It's not really something not really something I thought about. I thought if it was sugar, people were just eating it, basically.
um, so yes and no. Like, I guess there are nations that produce a lot more sugar than we do, and they
Hmm.
have an excess. So then they will probably, I guess, there are places that will convert their excess sugar into bioethanol or biobutanol as another energy carrier.
Hmm.
Um, Usually, I guess, through like from America, from North America through to South America. There are places that will do that, but it's not. I think it's more the whatever's left from a usually a food production process. So um, there'll be parts of unrefined sugar that people don't really eat.
Okay.
So to be able to convert that to something that's more beneficial um, is a piece of work that people do, whether that be energy or more platform chemicals or um, enzymes. There's a lot of work that goes into breaking down lignocellulosics from like woody and plant material. Um,
Yeah.
it's it's just that, I guess, trying to create that kind of, I guess it's a circular economy, isn't it? People want to have a closed loop, and if you have any waste, trying to work out what you can do with it to make it valuable or to make it part of your process is something that is always going to be beneficial, I guess.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Just thinking of superconductors, I mean, a few years ago we realized that MgB2 is potentially a pretty good superconductor. And the nice thing about it is it's a waste product. Like there's loads of it. It's dirt cheap. And so it's like, and it turns out that it's a decent superconductor. It's like, oh wow, this is good because
Yeah,
so yeah, no, I just hadn't really, I don't know, I guess I don't really delve into the sort of food production and what sort of waste we're generating and stuff like that. Not really thought about it. Whenever I think about food production, I'm thinking more about, whether livestock versus sort of vegan type
yeah,
foods. And I hadn't really considered that there's other stuff. I mean, the usual sort of too much sugar bad, too much salt bad, but it's
yeah.
very, very much a sort of overview thought of it. So right.
I think like when you start to think about it and you investigate it a little bit more, you learn so much stuff. Like food production in general, in many areas, is very low waste. Like
Okay.
there'll be things that you will have eaten or know that you eat that are basically just created from the waste of other processes. Like a good example is crisp manufacture. Obviously, lots of them are just fried or baked potato, but
Yeah.
in that process of like cutting a potato and washing a potato, you get a lot of leftover starch, and that starch basically just gets reconstituted and made into the crisps that you see that don't look like potatoes, like skips and quavers and stuff. That's just
Ah,
leftover starch being made into food stuff, so that you can sell it and people will buy it and eat it.
wow. Wow. Yeah. And I'm also loving, I don't know if you know this, but I started in material engineering by making crisp packets, putting the metal on the inside of crisp packets. So there you go. Got me into the whole field of material science. So I love that. That's cool. Well, that's good to know. And so then you were talking about I guess I don't know, alternative proteins, alternative food sources, really. So, what's the
Yeah.
driver behind that? And
So, so I mean, there's always going to be more than one driver, I guess. So that for me personally, I'm like most people who work in academia. I just get interested by new things, and it's something just to be a bit geeky and nerdy about. So, but then if I think about it from I guess, a career standpoint, as you'll know, one of the things that you need to do when you stop being as a postdoc, you need to kind of leave the umbrella that is created for you by your PI. But then when you have, if that doesn't happen, you need to try and carve out a niche for yourself within a department.
yeah,
So it's really more about the fact that no one's doing it in my department, um,
yeah,
which meant that it'd be something that I could have kind of ownership of. Obviously, not in a kind of protective way, but
yeah,
um, at least do the initial investigation. Like food process engineering, food in itself is such a broad area.
yeah,
So I started off thinking that maybe I'd do more microbiome work, because I'm still going to focus on growing growing microorganisms, seeing what you can do with them. So I thought initially I start off looking at microbiome work, but it's so broad in itself as a discipline that I couldn't think about where to start. Um, and then it kind of became clear that the students would like to have more food and drink stuff. So we started off having a little microbrewery that
oh
expands.
wow,
It's gonna expand, and we're gonna have an almost entirely student-run brewery in a few years. Hopefully, we'll also do some distilling too, to start making vodkas and gins.
nice.
Um, and that
More
stuff is
gin.
all going to be, yeah. It's going to be fun, but it isn't going to be necessarily as academically driven as I would like it.
Yeah,
So the alternative protein area is an area that's growing. There's a lot of research funding within it. Um, and therefore it's like an area that I thought would be really useful because it, it links back to skills I already have. So there's less learning that I have to do
mm.
to start off with. So, and like I also find it really interesting.
Yeah,
So many interesting questions that need to be answered. That like material science, there's some sensory stuff. I'm really interested in bringing more kind of psychology or at least just humanities into engineering. Um,
mm.
so people have more of an understanding of the impact of the things that we produce on society, but also like the historical impact of some stuff we don't need to develop because it's already been developed. We just ignored it for a while, or it's been developed in a different context
Yeah.
globally, and we should be looking wider than ourselves.
No, that's yeah, absolutely. But I love. So, I mean, one thing, obviously, when you're trying to find research and you're trying to carve out your niche, like you say, trying to find your thing, but it's also got to be commercial because
Yeah,
otherwise, in this current climate, you're not going to be able to fund it. You're just not going to be able to get the funding. And that's something that, I mean, I've got a lot of sort of scientific questions that I would love to answer with particular material systems, but there's no way I'm going to get funding for it because it's just not. It's interesting research, but that's all it is.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, always a little bit short-sighted because the more techniques you learn and the more you learn now, then that could come in useful later. But that's how research is. So it's good that there's the money there, and it's that part of. I mean, I guess that there's more global awareness of sort of the cost of animal farming when it comes to the environment, really. And you know, should be honest, you know, I've been a vegetarian for 25 years.
Mhm.
So I've been concerned about that for a long time, but
Yeah.
not quite got to the vegan stage because I also have an awful lot of allergies. So it's kind of, so I've always worried about the impact of this and always had a thought. And it's good that that's becoming commercial or it's becoming research saleable.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely becoming commercial, and I think one of the current good things about this space is that there's the ability to work both with research councils and with industry. Um, and the good thing, I guess, about that is that, as we both know, the research council priorities come and go. They change like the wind, don't they? So if you haven't
Yeah.
got an industrial group of people to work with, and then you kind of you could lose a bulk of where you could get your funding from. I've got a couple of interesting ideas with some people, like local, small, not really SMEs, like complete startups,
Okay.
who do some alternative protein work in London, and hopefully we'll be able to get some, like, carve out a little bit of time over the next 6 to 9 months to do some work with them. But then there's all
That's good.
like some of the companies are growing hugely, like getting like large amount of investment based almost entirely of an idea.
Wow. That's awesome. And if
Yeah,
you can sort of convert that into the research side of it and, you know, like you
yeah,
say, I
and
mean, it's all positive impact stuff as well.
yeah, and that's the key, isn't it? Like, we as academics, we look for positive impact. I think there's a growing realization there's more than one way to have a positive impact, and it can be through your traditional research grants and papers. But when it comes to that kind of more industrial impact, it's just as important. And potentially, I guess, as an engineer, seeing your work realized is always going to be more beneficial to me. But I mean, to me personally, as well as society.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, no, I completely agree about that. But, and so, I mean, is there a lot more drive? I mean, I guess when I, you know, became vegetarian, you're talking 25 years ago. And so, you know, the vegetarian was the weirdo and no one really wanted to know. But you're definitely seeing a lot more of a rise, particularly in veganism.
Yeah,
There's definitely more environmental awareness, and obviously, for me, not working in that field, I hear about it, but I don't know whether it's people just sort of, you know, with good intentions. But it's good to hear that the science is trying to evolve, and that actually that there is something there that people are trying to feed that need, and potentially there is options. I mean, and definitely I've seen the growth in different sort of meat alternatives. So I'm
yeah,
also allergic to soy, which is a pain in the bum as a vegetarian.
yeah.
And I'm celiac, so I can't have wheat, which rules out most of Quorn stuff, unfortunately.
Hmm.
But it's great to see more and more stuff coming out, and it's great to hear that there's a lot of startups around
Yeah.
London.
A surprising number, I think. Like, corn's a really interesting tale because it gave me an insight of how insular or maybe we, as a nation can be. Because it's been so big for so long, I assumed it was a global company, but they're really only just breaking America.
Yeah.
Like, um, we like I've been eating corn. Like, corn for me, I guess I eat almost everything, but I'm more kind of conscious now about what I eat than I was, say, 2 decades ago.
Mm.
Um, um, but I'd say when I was like an undergraduate, corn was like a cheaper version of meat that I could use because I couldn't really afford to eat meat all the time. Rather than thinking about where the meat came from, it was more that like I wanted to be able to eat like something that tasted like chicken, for instance,
Yeah.
so I could get some corn. And because it's for me, it's been in my life for 20 years or so. I kind of just assumed that it was everywhere. And so you talked. So I was on a symposium where one of the people from corn was like, "Yep, we're really just trying to break the market now in America." They're I guess globally, the rules around food changes depending on where you live. They like lots of the alternative protein startups were based in around California or Boston, as you would imagine, in the States.
Yeah.
Both, I guess, liberal areas, but also the areas that have big biotech companies anyway. So they started maybe, I guess it grew there 3 years ago, maybe, with companies like Impossible Foods, Beyond Meat, and Memphis Meats. But I think the whole area also brings up interesting questions, like if you're a vegan or a vegetarian, the question of why you've become a vegan or vegetarian has to be answered before you decide what alternative protein products you want to eat. So would you, as a vegan, eat a cultivated meat burger knowing that no animal had been harmed, if it was about the animal cruelty or the animal itself? And lots of vegans still wouldn't. So it asks more questions than it answers sometimes, which is why I think it's really important to have that kind of humanities element in any kind of educational offering that goes around. Well, I think in all engineering pretty much, because engineering is about making things that are supposed to support society. But we as engineers usually have that element of our thinking processes kind of blocked from us. I don't know, I think there's that thing where we, as engineers, go, "We've made you a better thing, so you should use it."
Yeah.
without thinking about whether or not anyone wanted it.
Yeah, we can make this, therefore you will have it. Yeah. I completely agree with that, and that's where it is important to be able to bring in sort of social aspects and the humanities aspects, and just do we need to? Is it a good thing? I suppose that's one, and I don't know whether you can answer this, but you know, a lot of people are sort of choosing veganism because of the impact on the environment. But what we've seen with other sort of alternative fuels in the past is that you've got an alternative fuel that's not digging up fossil fuels, but actually the carbon footprint of making them is huge. So, I mean, if we get away from farming, is it going to have the same sort of impact on the environment, or is there a reduction? Is it better? And I don't know if you can answer this.
So I can't answer it, is the honest answer. But I think, I guess there's a lot more kind of life cycle analysis done of work to see whether or not it is actually beneficial. I don't think we'll ever go to, we'll never be a completely vegan society. I think what needs to happen is probably that with our meat production or consumption becomes sustainable, and not just, I guess, like societally sustainable and environmentally sustainable, rather than we just consume it because it's there.
Yeah. I often think about the moral aspect. So, I mean, I used to have a summer job in New York, and I used to work with a lot of Canadians and people from the USA, and a lot of them hunted. You know, they'd go out and they'd hunt, and they were always like, "Oh, you must really hate this. Like, you must really detest it." But the truth was that it was done in a sustainable way. Like, they had rules. They'd go out, they'd kill. They wouldn't kill certain ages. They'd only do it in a certain amount. They'd monitor the population, and then they'd freeze it, and they'd be eating it over the year. And I'm like, well, no, that makes sense. That's how it should be. Like, that's, if we lived in that society, maybe I wouldn't be vegetarian. Don't get me wrong, I don't think that even in that situation I'd be able to eat an animal anymore. I just wouldn't. But but at least that felt more natural. It felt more sustainable, and it felt like that's how it should be.
Yeah.
Um, and so this, the question of whether if you grow meat in the lab and it's from cells and would you eat it? Yeah, I don't know. That's
I also think we have to be a little bit wary of that kind of incremental progress as well. Like if my method of making alternative protein is like slightly better than the normal farming method, is that good enough? Like
yeah,
if it's just a little bit better, why? Well, that's not what we should be aiming for, not
yeah,
environmentally anyway. We are doing the moral part. We're removing the need to kill animals, and like their, I guess, forcing them to have an unpleasant or cruel life.
yeah.
But like, I guess sustainability wise, we should be looking to do much better than just eating.
Yeah, and that's a really good point because I mean, so often, and I don't know, sometimes I get a little bit. I see certain environmental groups and stuff, and what they do is that they do a little bit better. It's a tiny bit better, and then talk about it and think they're done. And this is kind of the same when we're talking about diversity. You're like, you'll see that one diverse person will get to a position that's high enough, and they'll be like, right, we're done now. It's good, and they won't try and they see that as being good enough,
Yeah.
and they've done their part, and society is better, and we should all bow down to them. And and it's very similar in both ways. Like,
Yeah.
no, like we should always be looking to continue, make sure that there are other methods, and also, like you say, small changes aren't enough.
Yeah. Yeah, and I completely agree with you. Obviously, that kind of, I guess in my context, is often that assumption because a BAME member of someone who's from an ethnic minority has excelled or achieved a high status. Like, I guess the obvious example is Barack Obama, means that we now live in a post-racial society, which is obviously not true. We definitely need to do better. And one of the problems we have, I think, is, and I said this to someone, they disagreed, but I think, and I actually had a better example, but I can't remember what it is, so I'll have to use mine.
I come back.
If we have a pendulum, it's swung so far one way that trying to move it slowly to the middle, where it should be, isn't going to work. You kind of have to force it the other way and then let it correct itself. But that forcing it the other way is really, really difficult.
I have been talking about this. I've been using the example that as a society, we've been letting women do science for 100 years. Like, universities started letting women. Oxford are just celebrating the centenary.
Yeah.
So we can, and it took even longer for STEM, but let's say generously that we've been letting women do STEM for 100 years. And for 50% of the population, we have 23% of people in STEM are women.
Yeah.
And that's what happens if you just let people in and let the pendulum swing back. So I'm fully with you that we've got to bat it right to the other side, and then and it's more likely to settle in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big thing. I mean, we don't want. Yeah, no, we've got to take strong, positive, forceful action, and I completely agree with you on that. It's a better analogy than what I've been using, so I'm going to have pinched that by the next time you hear me speak.
You are free to have it.
Yes.
But like, as we know, like, making that pendulum swing is really hard. There's a lot of resistance to it. I think people find the slow incremental progress towards the middle more palatable.
Yeah.
But it's not achieving anything quickly. That's for sure.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's sort of the easier way of doing it is to sort of let it, and people will be more accepting of that. But like you say, it's just not enough. I mean, we just, there needs to be strong action taken. We need to really change how things are. I mean, when you look at the number of black professors in the UK, what you're talking 115 out of 20,000 thereabouts. I mean,
Yeah,
what the hell? Like, what's going on here?
yeah.
Do I mean, I realize we're sort of moving into the into sort of talking about the diversity and stuff, which is how we know each other. Another tiger on my channel. Thank you very
Yeah.
much. Um, but do you think things are improving? Do you think that pendulum is being pushed a lot more, or do you think that there's still a lot of resistance?
I think things are improving because we're talking about the pendulum being pushed rather than it actually being pushed.
Yeah,
But I think that's the first step, isn't it?
yeah,
Um, so for specific areas of diversity, um, the door is maybe open a little bit more. So because of the summer, there's a lot more. There's a big focus on race, and there has been across the entire HE landscape. I think it means that like a little bit of hard work now means that we might get a bit of a swing, but it's only going to be for race. And like you and I both know that one of the things that we try and do is whilst we all have our own specific focuses, we are thinking about trying to make things better for everyone. So within my role at UCL as the co-chair of our race equality group, it's really been a lot of trying to change some of the governance.
yeah,
So I always say that the best change is to be able to make it easier to make change later. So while I think people want to see actual physical change, but I think that's really important. But I think if I just were to push through one policy, for instance, that would be a lot of work.
yeah,
And then the person who follows me would have to go through the same amount of work again to push through the second policy.
yeah,
Whereas if we try and make policy change easier across the board, it helps everyone.
yeah, yeah. No, and this is one thing that I've been keenly aware of, and why I love working with the Tigers is that, it's different. I'm not just trying to make things better for me. I'm not just trying to make it better for trans people. I want to, it's all about trying to make it better across the board. And like you say, make it easier for change, make it easier for other people. And it's been good. And I mean, I get to learn a lot. And this summer I've been able to learn an awful lot more as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got to say, it's been really nice seeing more awareness, especially from fields and especially in media and stuff like that. People talking about these things, about equality, about equity, that just weren't talking about them before, and
Yeah.
actually starting to talk about them with a bit of respect. And talking's the first step.
Yeah. Absolutely. I don't know how it was for you, but because of the summer and its focus on race, what I found was that there are people in the equity or equality space who I've spoken to, like yourself, for ages about this stuff. But what I really liked about summer is it gave some of my friends who normally in their environment wouldn't talk about these issues like a voice. They felt they had the ability to vocalize what they were feeling and thinking and discuss their lived experiences in a way that hadn't been done before. So that was really good. It also meant that there was, for me, more people I could talk to about this. But I'm also like you. I love the fact that the Tigers is a inclusive space where we learn from each other. And I think it's also full of people who understand where their like weaknesses is with respect to knowledge about equality, diversity, and inclusion. And I think that my biggest weakness is probably going to be the next wave of stuff that happens in HE, and I think it's going to be revolving around ableism. Because that is like as with many things, like amazingly pervasive within HE. So I think next summer it might be an ableism learning experience for me, as well as trying to be, as we all are, good allies for each other.
It's interesting what you say about that. I don't know, and I don't know why this is, but I found that sort of when it comes to ableism, when I'm in meetings, I've actually been able to sort of pinpoint actions when it comes to ableism. I've actually been able to pinpoint actions, and I can be like, why don't we do this? Why do we do this? And I've been able to find, I've been able to point out specific things, but then with racism, I don't know whether I can point out those specific things. It seems like it's quite easy to say, right, we've got to have transcription for all our talks. That's an easy fix. And I suppose when it comes to race, I mean, you could say, well, you've got to have a BIPOC member on the panel or two and pulling out of panels. But,
I think actually they're both, the way in which they both act is quite varied. So there are definite practical elements that you can put out for both ableism and racism.
Yeah.
But there's always going to be grey areas with racism that are really hard to kind of define and stop. So like you say, you can just say we need to have a representative panel. We need to be more accessible physically and digitally. But there's still going to be, I think, other barriers that you can't just solve with a practical intervention. That usually revolve around culture within an institution. You have to ask yourself difficult questions like why, if you get past recruitment where we may have conscious or unconscious bias towards people who are either like us or not like us, when people are employed, why did they leave? A good example is Chris, isn't it? If your culture doesn't support all of someone, it doesn't support any of them, really.
Yeah. No, so I mean, like I said, that's what it's been nice. I think I realized where things were. It might seem like a bit of a weird example, but so I enjoy the Formula One. I watched the Formula One on Channel 4, and this last weekend, so Silverstone announced that they were naming the Silverstone Straight after Hamilton, so it's going to be the Hamilton Straight. And when they were telling him this, they actually said that he's probably the most successful racing driver he is at this point. But also they said, but they didn't just say that. They also said, and for all the work that you're doing for Black Lives Matter and raising awareness and trying to make Formula One more inclusive. And it's that sort of thing would just not have been said before this summer. And it really struck me that that was the case. And it was, I could never imagine. I mean, a few years ago, we couldn't imagine that there would never be, the pit girls in Formula One. And now, we've got people wearing Black Lives Matter t-shirts and standing at the front of the grid. And it's like, wow, I can't, I'm so surprised, but it's great to see.
It is. But as with, I think, all elements of equality or equity, what we've seen is people being more vocal on both sides of the discussion.
Yeah.
As in, I feel like that's the wrong term to use, isn't it? Because I don't think it is a discussion, but you know what I mean.
No, I know. I keep on using discussion because it is. I mean, people are still talking about it, and so it comes across as a discussion. I mean, especially with trans rights at the moment, a lot of people are saying there's no discussion to be had, and other people are saying, well, why aren't you talking about it? And so discussion is the only word you can use. And that's really difficult. I mean, I was quite, so even with, sexism in physics, there's a physicist, an Italian physicist who is very openly, sexist, very, said some horrible things. And I just found out that they got invited to do a talk a few weeks ago in Oxford. Now no one was advertising it, but he was here. He got an invited talk to Oxford.
Yeah,
And people are still willing to do that, and there's no consequence for doing this.
yeah, and it's one of the biggest problems, isn't it, within universities or academia or higher education in general, the lack of accountability. I think so. The requirement for freedom of speech, which I mean, I fully respect. I just think if it ever's going to negate someone's lived experience or stray towards hate speech or inciting hatred, then we should really consider whether or not we allow it to happen.
Yeah.
We, with discussion with our provost, to the head of the university at UCL, are moving towards the kind of model whereby the equality, the affected equality network will be discussed with whether or not any kind of speaking event will take place, and they also will be allowed to attend. So you can't have closed doors. So if someone was to come onto my campus and have with openly racist views, they couldn't have closed doors, and I would be allowed to attend if I wanted to.
Yeah.
To create debate.
Yeah, and that's so. There's a particular anti-trans group in the UK. Well, there's a few, but I mean, they invited me to one of their events. They said you're welcome to come. I couldn't put myself in that position. I knew it'd be hard, but it's interesting. And I mean, you were involved with. Am I right? There was so at UCL there was a lot of work on. Is there a department or something named after a eugenicist? Or I think I'm mashing all this.
No, you're not. Like, I didn't know where you're going with it. That's all.
No, that's all right. Yeah, neither did I.
So we have the Pearson building, which and we had the Pearson building because it's been denamed now. That Anthony McKay works in. We also have the Galton Chair, which is a chair of genetics, which I believe is also being denamed. We have a couple of other spaces. We actually sit on we had a eugenics inquiry, and I sit on the response group to the eugenics inquiry, and they're going through essentially where any space in the university or any title or chair that has a person's name on it, they're going through to see whether or not that name should stay. There are some spaces that probably will stay because they've basically done a lot of work with regards to reparations. So I think the Rockefeller building.
Yeah.
And I think the Rockefeller Foundation was actually set up as a part of its reparations from I think they must have gained a lot of money through the slave trade.
I didn't know that. Okay, so I knew about them gaining the money, but the reparations. Okay.
Yeah, they've done a lot of. Our building isn't part of that, but a lot of the work they've done, especially in America, has been based around reparations for the work for what they did. I guess it would have been in the 1800s, but it's tough, isn't it? Because if you're a rich white man in the 1800s, you probably had slaves. Like, I don't know where the line is drawn. It's going to be very difficult, I think, but at least we're having a discussion about it.
Yeah, I agree with that. It is difficult, and it's good to hear that they are actually sort of going through. I mean, I've and again, been talking about this. Like, I mean, we can't change history. Like, there were people who strongly believed in eugenics and were extremely sexist and misogynist who made discoveries. I mean, they did, and I don't want to erase their name because that's history. That is history. But it's how we celebrate that history. It's how I'm not being funny, if we keep on naming buildings or prizes after people that once we know. And yeah, you're right. I mean, a lot of rich white dudes in the 1800s probably will have owned slaves. It's kind of how it is, but I'd not really thought about well, what did they do? Did they try and at least overturn this? Were they a positive voice? Did they because you do hear some stories. You know, I mean, there's some scientists who were basically giving lab space to women before women were allowed to do science,
Yeah.
and they still lived in that world, but they tried to make a difference, and they did, which is good.
Yeah. But I mean, what I don't like actually is that discourse around rewriting history, when in reality what we're doing is just giving everyone a fuller picture of history.
Yeah.
I'm with you though.
Yeah.
Like, not everything should be. Some things definitely should be denamed or renamed, but not everything needs to be.
Yeah.
We just need to have more awareness of that historical context.
Yeah, and it is, and you do need to have that. And it's like when we're talking about statues and things like that. Like, it's not necessarily about removing the statue. Sometimes it's about putting it in context, like, you know, giving it space. To be honest, I think it's better that some of those statues are going and they're being put in museums or whatever, because that's context for me. That makes sense. I don't want to see some of these people on the high street when I walk by them, and I can't even imagine. But some of them, you know, I mean, there's some statues where I know that people weren't asking for them to be removed. They were asking for big plaques to say this is how they got their money, and this was their history, and this is how they did it.
Yep.
And it seems like, yeah, that's too much as well.
Yeah.
Like you say, it's having more awareness of the history.
Yeah. Absolutely. And like saying rewriting history, like it isn't constantly being rewritten. It's just that people want to have their version of the history celebrated versus, as like, I guess, more of what we would describe as a more holistic view of history.
Yeah.
Where you get to celebrate, well, not celebrate, you get to understand the good and the bad. No one's
Yeah.
perfect. Like, we're not perfect. Like,
Yeah.
I've obviously done bad stuff. But I think what I have done also is own up to the bad stuff and try and grow and learn.
Yeah.
Which I have the advantage of being able to do that because I'm still alive, obviously.
Well, and this is where the problems lie. You're like, you know, you don't know. Like, say, some people, it was their time and it was part of how they did. Now, some people still did stuff above and beyond.
Yeah.
And when you're looking at people more recently, like Crick, who, you know, grew up in a time when there wasn't slavery and yet was still a big proponent of it. Well,
Yep.
yeah, they can go. You know, they can get in the bin.
Absolutely.
They made a fantastic discovery. It was great. But no, I mean, they should not have anything named after him. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, we've not got the chance to give people the sort of, the chance to redeem themselves or sort of figure it out. And it is a different world. Yeah, I don't know. It's like I say, it's not about rewriting history. It's just about putting it in context, making it more open, making it more understood. The physicists that I talked about before said, well, most of the big discoveries in physics have been made by men. Well, yeah, because women weren't allowed to study physics. I mean, you know, you're right, but why are you right? Like, it's like saying that, you know, there's not been any black British prime ministers because black people aren't capable of being a prime minister. No, they've just not been. They've not been allowed to be in that position.
Yeah. I don't see what is so wrong with just saying that. Like it's. I don't know why people rebel against it so much.
I've been thinking of, you know, I mean, the truth is, so I used to say this whole thing of like equality isn't cake, there's plenty to go around, and then you start to realize, well, that's not true, because, you know, there'll suddenly be more competition for those positions, for those, whether it's prime minister, whether it's for MPs, whether it's for heads of department in science, whether it's funding. The truth is there's more competition, so people have got a vested interest in not allowing equity for other groups. I mean, all of a sudden they've got more competition, and maybe they just don't think they're good enough.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Some people are fully aware that they are there in the positions they have, not based on any merit, but just because of who they are. But I think I'm mostly saddened by people who climb and pull the ladder up, because I do believe that within a group it's not a zero-sum game.
Yeah.
That you should be able to support people from within your group, or your protected characteristic, whatever you wish to define it as, to achieve the way that you have.
Yeah. I had a very, very similar conversation with Andrew Prinsep the other day about someone. And, I mean, they possibly were a result of positive intervention to try and sort of address gender balance.
Mm-hmm.
And what they did is, because they sort of pretty much got handed things. I think that it's important. We already talked about this. It's important to push, but there are some people that will then pull the ladder up. Yeah, I mean, it's exactly what you just said. It's and seem to have absolutely zero awareness that they've benefited from this, and that it's not done. That you've got to carry on pushing for equality just because you're rich or well off or in a good position doesn't mean anyone can be there. It's there's a lot of good role models that we could be celebrating. There's a lot of good people that we could be sort of bringing up and that we should be celebrating. And that's that's the great thing about Tigers and this podcast. I'm trying to talk about talk to people who, honestly, I see them making a positive impact, trying to make those changes. People who inspire me to carry on trying to do that, and you're one of them.
Thank you, but it is hard sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah,
because often it's about your lived experience. People are denying your own, making you seem less than yourself, and I think it wears on anyone. But the positive thing, like you've just said, is that there are a group of people who are supportive, and if you need them, they'll be there and will help you in any way that they can. Because I've seen it with so many. A good example, and I hope that of this is that we have a BME students officer in our university. It's a full-time sabbatical position. I don't understand how anyone can do it for more than one term. People do try to. It almost always affects their physical or mental health. It's the constant barrage they must get of student complaints that revolve around racism. That I don't know how you can put up with it.
Yeah,
it's so difficult. I'm fortunate in that. When it's staff, because I only really deal with staff and not students so much, that it's usually a relatively simple conversation, and people, because the power dynamic has shifted slightly.
I
don't understand how you could survive doing it.
It's really hard. I was sort of contemplating my career earlier on in the year, and I was looking at, there's a lot of equality and diversity positions, and even then, even though that's not listening to the complaints, I wondered whether if I took on a permanent, full-time equality and diversity thing, would my fire go? When you're trying to change things, it's hard enough. You feel that you're butting against a brick wall. Someone once told me that I would find equality and diversity as a job to be a golden bird cage. It seems great, but actually no. And they're completely right. They nailed it, and I just didn't realize. And I don't know how anyone does it full time.
No one can fight that much for that long, and I think naturally your fire wouldn't go out, but it would definitely diminish. I feel like the golden bird cage analogy is a really good one.
Yeah, it was someone that I look up to a lot, and it was interesting to hear that. And yeah, yeah, it's interesting. But we
Yeah.
are making this progress. We are making little steps forward. I'm sort of keeping an eye on the time because I realise that you've got a meeting to get to in a little bit.
Yeah.
From the sort of the science side of it, or even from the diversity side of it, is there anything that you want to sort of mention or chat about, or anything that we didn't dive into? I realised we ended up talking a lot more about sustainability and environment when we were talking about your subject. Sorry,
No, that's fine. You know me, I'm happy to talk about anything.
that's
I
good.
I think like something we kind of hinted at, but not really explicitly said, is that requirement for a support network. Uh,
Yes.
and we thought, like, I guess there was a bit in the Tigers about mentoring,
Mm,
and I think there's also a discussion that needs to be had about the differences between mentoring, advising, supervising, advocating, sponsoring, and the
yeah.
different terms that people seem to use interchangeably, but do have like nuances within their meanings. I think
Yeah.
something I said once was that like it takes a village to raise a researcher, and one unless you have the perfect supervisor, that supervisor isn't going to do it,
Yeah.
or your PI isn't going to do it. And I think what we need to really encourage is for people to go out and find or create a support network.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of times people are afraid to ask for help, but when you do ask for help, almost everyone will give it to you.
Mm.
I mean, there are people that won't, but you know who they are, so you won't. You would ask
Well,
them.
yeah, yeah, you're probably not doing that. That's interesting, but it does sort of beg the question. So I've kind of shied away from mentoring. There's a few reasons, and some is to do with like, well, I'm not quite where I want to be, so why would anyone want to listen to me? Um, but the other thing is we're busy, I mean, especially the
Yeah,
people that are making the differences, the people that are making the changes are so busy. And I'm just like, if I took a mentor on, I'd want a mentee. I'd want to be able to. I want to do it right. I want to do it properly, and I
yeah.
don't think that I've got the time at the moment.
I think that's. I think you're completely right, but I
Mm,
think the key part is that knowledge that they've got lots of them. If you're the sole mentor, it's
yeah,
responsibility. If the first thing you say is, I can only really help you in this narrow sphere, any other help you want, and we can discuss what other help you want, because like the
yeah,
first thing is always going to be around framing what's needed. You should get elsewhere.
yeah, yeah,
Uh, and then it's really like a like just like for people like me and you, um, making people not make the mistake that we've made along the way. Like a lot of don't do that. Like it's a lot of work. You won't get you anywhere, or that kind of thing.
yeah. I keep on saying it's too late for me, so I'm trying to make it better for the next gen.
Yeah, yeah. Basically,
Yeah, and I'm happy with where I am. It's not ideal, it's not perfect, and it's not necessarily where I could have imagined, but it's good. But yeah, if we can work to make it better for whoever's following, that'd be awesome.
yeah. So I guess what I'm not telling you that you need to be a mentor. I just think people should find mentors,
Yeah.
and more than one.
And I actually sort of resonate because I could probably do with mentors myself. And I probably resonate with the idea that, if you ask, all of a sudden it's seen as weakness or that you've got something wrong. And
Yeah,
no, I know that I've got strengths and I know I've got weaknesses,
exactly. And I
even just
think,
time management.
but it also goes back to the beginning, doesn't it? If we circle back, no, before we started the podcast or the video,
Yeah.
that discussion around people getting roles based on who they know.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
that's that informal sponsoring that some people never get. So you kind of have to like, and like either role doesn't need to be formal, but you need to have someone that you could ask questions about specific things.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's funny. We were talking about people just getting jobs because of who they know, but also that's people making use of mentors or
Yeah.
in that case maybe golf club membership. But yeah, that's interesting that it is positive. And I did I was advising someone that was a PhD recently who was saying, you know, how do I find a postdoc? I'm like, chat to people in your field, get to know them.
Yeah.
Like, because you're more likely, you know, yes, they get advertised, but you're more likely to find someone that has a position.
Yeah.
I mean, I heard about my current role through a colleague of a colleague who was like, oh, I know this person's advertising, and in fact, my postdocs as well.
Mm-hmm.
And you still got to work hard, and you're not going to get that. You're not just going to get handed the position.
Yeah.
But it doesn't half help if at least people say, hey, we've got this position, and that,
Exactly.
yeah, that's interesting.
Exactly, and it's really. So I was in another discussion recently where someone described it as knowing the cheat codes for a game.
Yeah.
And if you don't know them, like you're stuck, or like people having the ability to play games on like easy mode or hard mode. If you don't know the cheats,
then
you'll start playing the same game as everyone else, but at a disadvantage.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And it's just like say, it's about making sure that, and this is where the equity comes in, making sure everyone's got the same. Either no one's got the cheat codes or everyone does have.
Yeah, and so I'm a big proponent of that. Everyone should have them.
Yeah.
And there's little things like being involved in recruitment processes for lectureships in my institution, and seeing the differential between people who know things and people who don't. So
yeah,
like some candidates will talk to members, like all of the academic staff in the department, about their research prior to interview. And try and work out how their work would fit in, how they could support each other people. Whereas other people just come in blind and be like, "This is what I'm really interested in," and like just a conversation where you just say, "Look, you should talk to everyone that you can who you think might be linked to your work. You should talk to them and find out how they would want you to link to their work." And then you can put that in your presentation when you talk to the department, because then they're going to be like, "Oh, that's really good because this person is going to help me."
I hadn't thought of it in that way, and I realized that I have been thinking around this issue, so that puts a lot. I realized that I've accidentally been doing that recently, but without thinking about it, and now I can focus myself, so thanks for that.
But that's another thing, doing too much stuff does stop you from focusing. You do need to take time out, and you like have to, at times you do, like I say, everyone should have a mentor or be a mentor. You do have to be selfish at some point and be like, what do I need to do for me?
I've become really selfish with my not selfish, but precious of my time. I spend time modeling in the evenings and weekends, and I've got a jigsaw here. It's like, no, I'm turning my computer off. Like, I'm turning my work emails off because I need to. And don't get me wrong, if I've got a conference coming up or something, I'm going to work. I'll work evenings, I'll work weekends because I'll need to. But just being able to take time is so important. So
stops the burnout.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much for this chat. It's been amazing chatting with you.
Been too long, so hopefully we'll get to speak to each other again soon.
Yeah, I hope so, and maybe even we need to have meet up in London once the world opens again.
yeah, we definitely should do.
Cool. So cool. Well, thank you so much for that.
You're most welcome, Clara. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, no, it's been a pleasure. Cheers. Yeah, so that was cool. That was a great conversation. Rachel ended up carrying on talking afterwards, and then I realised that Mike had to get to a meeting. So, there was stuff. It's like, oh, I could have mentioned this. We could have talked about this. There was more questions I had. I would have loved to have been able to talk about more, but I don't want to take people's time up either. So, you know what? I think maybe some of these conversations I can have around too, like chat with more people. Anyway, so obviously this is the vodcast or the podcast, depending on the format you're watching. There's a whole bunch more out there of these scientific chats. I'm also kind of looking forward to maybe starting to do more social justice chats as well, with people that aren't scientists, some of my role models, but we shall see. With that, thanks very much for listening. Like, subscribe if you can, and until next time, bye.